Howdy and welcome back. I'm Steven and this is FWP Reviews. Today we're going to continue the long month of video reviews that I have been on and take a look at a movie that has become pretty divisive over the few days since it's released, and that movie is The Last Duel. The Last Duel is a story of a trial by combat. John de Carouges is a well-respected knight known for his bravery in battle. Jacques Legree is a squire who has become admired by the noble courts because of his intelligence. When Legree viciously attacks Carouges' wife Marguerite faces certain suffering and death in name of getting the truth out there. When the king catches wind of this, a trial by combat is set up to determine who is telling the truth. With that in mind, let's get into it. There's a lot to this movie, seeing as it is much longer and much denser than most of the average movies we get to see these days. To the benefit of the movie, the fascinating and involving story structure make this movie entertaining and something to behold from the start to the end. It gets very heavy at moments and it fits into the story pretty well, but there are some valid concerns about that, but we'll get into that a bit later. In terms of performances, Adam Driver and Matt Damon give good performances, but I don't think that they'll be getting any award recognition for what they've done because they're just good. They're nothing special. Jodie Comer, on the other hand, is astounding and definitely steals the show in this movie. Jodie Comer has really broken onto the scene this year and has begun to establish herself as one of the generational talents for that age group. Ben Affleck also brings some pretty effective comedic excellence to a role that is just so bizarre, only Affleck could pull off something like this. Great production design and directing is obviously going to be one of the trademark and staples of this style of movie. At least you'd hope. In this case though, it definitely is all of that. Ridley Scott has still got it despite him being 80-something years old. The fact the man is working like this is insane to me. Whether he should be or not, that's another question. The production design is amazing. We see a lot of detail and attention taken to these huge sets that have been designed, and we also get to see this backed up with the excellent costume design. However, for a movie that cost almost $100 million to make, you'd obviously expect this to be all that good. Now to recoup the profits. Well, not really, because why would this movie make that much money? This movie is definitely one that seems hard to market to the massive audiences that go to the theaters, and it kind of blows my mind that they would throw $100 million in it when it's not really necessary. Oh well, what's to be done? I'm not in charge of who gets money and who doesn't, but I'm just glad the movie was good at least. In terms of the narrative, I was fascinated and pulled in at almost every point. It manages to make something to remember and something special of the subtleties between the chapters, and it's interesting to try and pick them out and see sort of how everybody's perspective of each other sort of forms the story at hand. And by the end, I wasn't even sure what to really expect out of the finale. It manages to create mystery and suspense while obviously trying to get you to put all of your chips in the truthful side, but it also manages to sow really effective seeds of doubt as to whether this will actually work out for them. We see this most prevalently when it becomes very real that they might lose, when Marguerite is sort of finally revealed to what might happen to her if they do lose, and the sort of way that's delivered sort of lets you know that this is a possibility that the movie could take. The Last Duel, a namesake of this movie, comes from the titular fight between Carouges and Legree. Without this fight working, this movie obviously could have been nothing more than a boring snooze fest because it's quite hard to get through some of the scenes of this movie because it's so damn slow and does some very weird things with what it decides to show, and if this battle didn't work, it doesn't make this crescendo worth it. But fortunately for this movie, the battle did work. The battle is gory, tense, you never really know exactly what's going to happen until it happens, and you get to see the brilliant finale of this movie unfold. It also manages to make even the scenes that could have been left on the cutting room floor worth it, as you sort of see where this huge crescendo has come to its climax and its resolution. Because of all of what I've said just now, it has made itself clear to me that this movie is one of the better movies I've seen this year. This movie has managed to make a name for itself. This movie is not without its pitfalls and its massive controversies, which I promised I would address, so here we go. Besides the typical flaws, this movie has a lot of things working against it, but let's backtrack and go with the smaller, more typical movie flaws first. As I mentioned briefly before, there were parts of this movie that definitely could have been left out. I mean, we're seeing it play out 3 times. Some of these scenes were just a little bit too long and a little bit too unnecessary. Ultimately, this does become fine because the crescendo that is the movie sort of resolves almost perfectly in the final battle, that it can allow for smaller flaws along the build-up to sort of get swept under the rug. To me, this movie feels to be making sort of a joke of how men were treated in medieval society and how they show off Matt Damon's character getting this fancy parade after he manages to ultimately win his duel and save his wife. Sort of feels like a jab at exactly how everything in that society was delivered, and the way that that plays out may not always be seen that way. It feels quite obvious to me that this is what they were going for, but the fact that the movie has left enough gray area for people to be wondering if this is a movie about men championing for their women in a society where we've seen Fight Club become the ultimate bro movie. People that are making movies like this should probably be more conscious. Maybe it's not their responsibility, but it's still definitely a misstep this movie takes, not making it abundantly clear by giving us a sort of tagline of something that just makes it all come together, what this movie is thematically going for. Regarding the depiction of the attack on Lady Margaret, this movie has drawn a fair bit of criticism. The idea of this type of attack being left on screen is something that people are arguing should be completely left out, which there's definitely merit to that argument. Others argue that the writer they brought in, Nicole Holofcener, was too late in the process, and so much of the story had already been formed that it was too late for her to make the impact of the sort of female chapter where we're focusing on Marguerite's perspective. People have argued that that should have been more important and it should have been more clear what exactly was going on, and that bringing her on so late in the production with most of the other parts of the story already formed, it just felt rushed to some people. And I see that argument, and I think as a whole it works for the movie, but there is merit to the argument that you're planning on writing a whole thing about how we're supposed to believe women and making fun of how medieval society and society today even has championed men for fighting to the death over something that shouldn't have happened anyways. It does make sense that that draws a lot of criticism and brings in a lot of the ideas of, well, maybe they should actually bring in the people they're going to plan on writing with instead of waiting till the last minute. In terms of the specific scene that a lot of the criticism has been drawn of, I can say that it definitely feels weird watching it on screen, and a part of that is obviously the unsettling nature of what we're watching, and a part of what I had read before the movie and had been thinking about when I was watching the scene. And as I watched the scene, it became relatively clear to me how it kind of fit into the story. It didn't feel unnecessary as much as it felt, okay, maybe we could have done without this. At the very least, it didn't feel like they just put it in there to be grotesque and shocking. It made sense in terms of how the perspectives were being played out in the movie, and it was interesting to see that. But the criticism then again lies in, should that even be in a movie? And that argument is definitely valid, and people can have their opinions about that, and it's interesting to see how that has sort of brought this into the main fold of the conversation. And I think moving forward there'll be a more clear line of thinking, hopefully, just because of this movie. But for this movie, at least, the questionable part of it is not, did they just put this in the movie to be disgusting, but should this even be in a movie when you could work around it at all? The movie could have worked around it, but the real question is it should have, and that works at least for me to look past that as much as this movie is involved. As you can see, this movie has managed a laundry list of flaws, much like some of the shittier movies I've seen this year, but some of the massive pros, the massive sets, we get to see some incredible directing and some incredible performances, specifically from Jodie Comer, make this movie something special and make it a good movie to watch and one of the better movies that I've seen this year. With that, let's wrap this review up. The Last Duel has become a very divisive movie over the few days since it's been released, and after viewing it, I have been able to deem it a high rating despite some of its larger flaws. Next week, we'll be taking a look at the hotly anticipated Dune. Spoiler alert, it's amazing. I've already seen it when I'm filming this. Until then, follow my Instagram at FWPReviews100 for daily written reviews about the newest movies. With that, this is FWP Reviews signing off. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.